trying to do this with the light, but I think it's kind of bothering more than... But look at this. Sorry about the glare. I know it's really annoying.
One eternity later.
Okay, this is not too bad. Hi guys. Eva here. Yes, I've injured my wrist. I'm okay. Welcome back to my channel, Pink the Reader. I am about to do a kind of crazy long video, so grab a snack. I might divide this into, not sure, we will see. I was watching this channel that I really enjoy, and his name is Daniel Green. He does video all related to fantasy, sci-fi. He does a lot of explanations videos about, for example, the origin of fantasy or the origin of sci-fi, and you know, a lot of tier ranking videos, a lot of videos that were really interesting. And then I found this video really informative about different genre of fantasy, sub-genres basically of what we call fantasy / sci-fi. And then I had a crazy idea, but I think it's a good idea of giving actually a recommendation of books that I've read in the single subgenres, so I can get a chance to talk about books that maybe I've not mentioned before in my channel. Many of those you'll be familiar with, many of those are popular, but maybe others are not. So I'm gonna give you a whole basically video of recommendation based on fantasy subgenres. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna link down below the video where he does get in a bit more details about the various subgenres, because I knew this video was gonna be long, but I didn't want to be too long. I'm just gonna give you a really brief synopsis of what the subgenre means and a little bit of synopsis of what the book that I read and loved what was about, but really brief as possible, so this doesn't get dragged too much. And yeah, without further ado, it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm gonna go through the subgenres that he mentioned in that video, and I'm gonna list my favorite that I've read so far in the genre. And of course, I am also planning to do a TBR for kind of a reading challenge where I need to read another books in all the genres, so leave your recommendations down below. I love to hear them. So before you bite my head off, although I like to see you try, I want to mention that this book is not gonna be in here, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Only reason being, probably, I don't know, but because I'm halfway through, I'm not done with this yet. I cannot put this in here just because I've not finished it, and didn't seem fair to put in my recommendation video book that I've not completed. And then the other book that it's on my TBR but I've not read yet is The Wheel of Time. It's in one of my boxes because I'm about to move soon, so all my books are going soon in boxes, so this is probably the last time you'll see this specific background. And so The Wheel of Time is in my TBR, is one of the boxes coming to with me in the new house, but because I've not read that yet, it's not in here. That's the only reason, probably. I don't know, I haven't judged it because I've not read it. And final disclaimer, these are my recommendations. Again, these are just books that in the genre I've read so far and really loved. I would probably read way more in the genre, and in 5 years time this list can be completely different. Just my opinion. I'd love your recommendations. Shitty comments, just keep it for yourself, or they're just gonna be ignored anyway. So, disclaimer before we start, last one, I promise. I might mention a couple of books in a sub-series if I think they're both worth mentioning. And also, a lot of these genres are interchangeable, so one book that can be in one sub-series might be in many more, but I've just chose to put them in one category and just not keep mentioning the same book all over again. So for each sub-genres, I've chosen a different book. I'm well aware that these books can be put in more sub-series than one. I hope the explanation was right. If not, it's really simple, so it will come along. You know, the more we go, the more you'll get what I mean. But I listed my recommendation in the same order as Daniel was listing the subgenres, just because it was easy for me to write down the genres while he was mentioning them. The first one we've got is Alternative History Fantasy. Pretty self-explanatory, you know, takes place in our world, but at one point in history things diverged from what we know, what we studied in school, and the history, they invented a new history basically. I have not read many of those, not at all, and really struggled to find one, which was not the best to begin a list with. I really like to complicate my life more than already is complicated. And anyway, the one that I came up with, and actually I've read really recently and I enjoyed enough to mention it, it was Deadlands Ghostwalkers by Jonathan Mayberry. And this takes, yes, inspiration from the video game, and they did a series with different authors. I think 3 are out so far, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a bit more, but this one is the first in the series. I think they're all companion. I don't know, I've just read one, but this one is the alternative history elements comes in place where basically in USA there was this huge earthquake that took place in California and modified all the geography, and United States becomes really different compared to what we know them to be as of now. And in the first one you follow a mercenary who finds himself basically being hired by an Indian to come and retrieve something really important, and it is full of action, and there are a lot of also elements that I'd say a bit horror-ish, a lot of creatures, a lot of horror splatters in actions, but it's really entertaining and it's just really fast-paced, and I listened to it really quickly. Again, because I've not read many, this recommendation is probably not, it's not a 5-star book, but it's one that I really enjoyed, and I'm basically prompting you to give me more recommendations because clearly I've not read enough. Arthurian fantasy, and again this is pretty clear from the title, but are fantasy that are based on the Arthurian legend. Another sub-series where I've not read many, and I used to read those kind of genres more back in the days when I was a teenager, and one that I still remember that it was really complex and intriguing, although I have not read in many years one in the series, so I do not know if I would stood the test of time, but it's the Mist of Avalon series. I've got here The Forest House by Marion Zimmer Bradley. This is not the first one in the series, I think this is the second one. I don't have the first one because it's back in Italy. Complex series based on the Arthurian legend, so you follow all the characters that you know from Arthurian legends, Morgana, and then you got Arthur and all of that, and it's really complicated because you start from way before Arthur was even born, and then you go and and then you go past that, so it is a bit complicated. There is a lot of romance in here, I remember, and it was a little bit slow paced, but I've just read a couple and I want to continue on. They intrigue me enough to continue on. Assassin fantasy. So this is a subgenre where the main protagonist is an assassin. The plot evolves around our main protagonist being an assassin or a bunch of assassins, and I couldn't think of a better one than Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. I absolutely love this book. I know not everybody loves it because of the way it is written, or maybe they just don't like his style, or they don't like the story. I personally loved it. It's not a 5 perfect stars, but it's really close, and this is about Mia Corvere. Mia Corvere is the daughter of a powerful couple, and they gets murdered from people that want to take the power from them. She manages to escape the killers, and she ends up in a school for assassins. And in the first book specifically, you follow a lot of her being actually in school and following the lessons to become this assassin. Really fascinating. Really enjoyed everything about this book, and I absolutely love Mia. So yeah, Nevernight. It's also pretty famous, so you know what I'm talking about. Then we have Christian fantasy, which is fantasy based on the Christian religion. And this is one that I actually struggle with because I've kind of found fantasy based on Christian religion really boring. I'm sorry if you love them, good for you. I don't really love the religion aspect of fantasy in most of them, not in all of them, but in most of them I don't really love it. So when I was thinking about what to put in here, I actually came up with this, which if you're familiar with it, you gonna probably just really gonna bite my head off. Why? Because this is really blasphemous. So basically this is the story of Jesse. Jesse is a reverend who is not really religious, but he becomes a reverend, and then he is bestowed the power of an entity that is more powerful than God. So he becomes more powerful than God. And in all this comic series, which is long but not too long, there is a lot of violence, a lot of blasphemy, and also a lot also of discussion about religions and having those powers and what they mean and bad and good. But it is done in a way that's quite violent out there, and it might be considered offensive, so be aware of that. And at the end of the day, this is entirely based on Christianity. So the premise is that you got a Christian preacher becoming more powerful than God. I would suggest this to everybody. No, definitely you have to be open-minded, you have to be an adult, and you don't have to mind a bit of blasphemy and a lot of violence. I'll show you some of the art. Not my favorite, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna leave it there because I think people are gonna hate me a lot because of this. But as an alternative, comic fantasy. This is fantasy that has a lot of humor in it. So for my comic lovers, followers that love comics as much as I do, I would say a really light but really humoristic fantasy that I suggest is I Hate Fairyland by Scotty Young. And I showed some of the art. Is it bloody? No. One of my favorite comics ever. Gertrude, she goes to Fairyland and she's supposed to find the key and get back by the night. And when she's a kid, she cannot find the keys. She is stuck in Fairyland for 25 years and now she's in the body of this little girl. But she's really angry and mad and she just wants to get the hell out of there. And she is gonna butcher a way out. Cannot say swear words. So for example, fuck becomes fluff and all of it. But yeah, it's fluffy, hilarious, and definitely worth a try. It's just 4 volumes. For books lover, and I'm sure you'll see this coming miles away, the Discworld series. It's a dear series in my heart. This takes place in flat world. Yes, it's flat. We should tell them. They would really love those books. But this flat world is on the shoulder of 4 elephants that roams around the space on top of a giant tortoise. What can you ask more? And then it's really hilarious. That sub-series, I'm gonna do a way in-depth video about the whole series when I'm done with it. I'm almost there. And yeah, I've just picked up 2 randomly, but Mort is my favorite one. Sorry about the light. Mort is my favorite one. And then we got all sub-series. I really enjoyed all of them. It's a really famous series. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you what the Discworld series is, but if you do, then you'll have to wait for my comprehensive video. Coming of age fantasy. A fantasy about a main protagonist that starts as a teenager or as a kid, and then we see them grow throughout the book or the books series. And a really famous one for this, I think, would be The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Yes, I've read this. Yes, I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it as much as other people did. I know, hate me, whatever. I've enjoyed it. It's a 4 point something. It's just not the perfect book either. And just, I'm sorry. I'm just, I've just read the first one though, so I've not continued on. I will definitely continue on. And again, it is definitely worth a mention in here. However, my personal recommendation would be Alpha King, the Shattered Sea series by Joe Abercrombie. I have read all the series, loved the first 2 books, didn't love the third one and final one. However, I really enjoyed the first 2 books, and I think there is definitely a major growth from one of the protagonists we follow in the first book to where we end up in the third one. I might not enjoy what happens, but it's definitely a growth that he goes through, and him and all the other characters. It's a fantasy that takes place in its own world. And in the first one, our protagonist, he was the brother of who was supposed to become the king, but then his father and his older brother gets killed, and he was doomed to become a priest. And I think, if I don't remember, he was already kind of a priest, and then all of a sudden he was supposed to now be a king, and he was not ready for that and not happy about that. Joe Abercrombie, I absolutely love his writing style. It's one of my favorite one personally, so definitely give this a try if you might have already read this, as probably the majority of people did, and you want to get something new. Court intrigue fantasy, so it's all based on court intrigue and all of that. Now, when I was compiling this list, I was a little bit sad because it was like my baby, my favorite fantasy ever. I wanted to put in the best category, but then I realized there was not such a thing as the best category, and I just had to relax and just go with the flow and just say it actually really fits well in this category, you should put in there. So I did, and you probably know what this is, but it's of course Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. It's probably to this day the best fantasy series I've ever read. It's my favorite, at least. We're not talking about a TV show the last season, we're just not.
Several bad puns later.
But I love this so much. And again, when you come down to court intrigue, fantasy based on, you know, betrayals and court intrigues and that and plot twists, I cannot think a better example of this. And then everybody's familiar with this. I'm really not gonna go through what this is about. Dark fantasy are fantasy that are got a really dark and heavy aspects to it. The topics they deal with, what happens in the story is really harsh basically, and they have got a more intense, more for adults usually, more less happy books with the dark theme as a base basically. Dark fantasies. For the comics lovers, I would say that the dark fantasy I absolutely loved so far is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, and I'll show you some of the art. Really pretty close to the beginning, so it's not spoiler. I've read a few volumes of this. I'm not done. I want to collect them and then just binge read and start from the beginning. But I absolutely love this, and this is about this bunch of humans, and they want to capture the god of death to prevent people from dying, specifically themselves from dying either. And instead they end up capturing Morpheus, the god of dreams, and these are the repercussion of them imprisoning Morpheus. And then after a bunch of years, when he gets finally freed, what happens? It is also be considered horror, definitely, but I think it's more dark and intense than necessarily just horror, so that's why it's in here. And then for the books, I've actually a series that's not really talked about these days on booktube, at least I've not heard many talk about these. R.A. Salvatore, and this is called Homeland. This is book number 1 in the Legend of Drizzt book, and this series is huge. It's made of sub-series again, so definitely go online and look at the chronological order, or choose a sub-series you want to read. I believe this is the first one, chronologically speaking, because I'm kind of careful when I do this, but I might be wrong. If you know, just leave down the comments below. But I think this is book 1 definitely in this trilogy / series, and you follow Drizzt.
Tomorrow.
Drizzt.
Tomorrow for sure.
You follow this guy, and this guy is a dark elf living underground, and he lives in a matriarchal society which is ruthless. This fantasy is dark. Not only the scenery and the environment they find themselves in, which is really dark and grim and hard to live in, but also the structure, the political structure, and the way the society is constructed is really crude. And our protagonist goes through a lot, but I absolutely loved this. I really enjoyed. I cannot wait to continue the series, and it's not too long, so definitely dark fantasy that I would definitely recommend to delve into. Or if you want something even shorter and really beloved, Coraline, loved this one as well. Dragon fantasy with dragons in that, but it has to be like kind of the main aspect of a fantasy for what I interpret. Otherwise, you know, Game of Thrones would go in there and many others, but personally, I chose one that it's translated in English but not all the series, which is a pity because I loved this book when I was a kid, and it's a chronicle of the emerged world, and you follow Nya, and she is an half elf, and I fell in love with fantasy because of her and because of this series of books, which in Italian are really well written, and there are dragons, and it's all based on the society of these dragon riders. And now I've not read Aragorn, all that kind of series. I've heard terrible things about it. I know a lot of people love it, but I think I kind of missed the train when I was at that right age, and I'm not I'm not gonna go and read it. I'll be really honest, if you get upset by that, I'm really sorry, but it's not gonna happen. But these ones I really enjoyed, and I think I would enjoy them even if I read them now. When I go to Italy, I always pick up the next in the series, a really long series made of different sub-series. So you got the original one and then what happens later on. And all the series so far that I've read, loved them so much. Even this one I really enjoyed, but the second one, the second trilogy, is my favorite one, and unfortunately I don't think it's translated, so I know that's a bit mean, so I'm not gonna tell you about that. But the first one I really enjoyed and is translated, and it is more for younger readers, but it's what made me love fantasy so much, and dragons are really prominent in it, so I had to kind of recommend this. Or I Would Betray Teenage Ava. High fantasy. Now there is a lot of controversy regarding this genre. I'm not gonna go through with that. I think Daniel addressed it really well, so you can always refer there. But high fantasy is basically fantasy that doesn't take place in our world. So the author created the map, created the world, and it's pretty much a lot of fantasy we are familiar with. The Stormlight Archives are definitely a high fantasy. This could be mentioned, high fantasy. But because I said I was not repeating myself and not repeating books, I would go with Steven Erikson, Gardens of the Moon, which is a huge series, and all the books are huge, which I really appreciate. I really enjoyed this one. I was a bit hesitant going to this, and I'm not gonna give you a synopsis just because it's really complicated, and you follow many characters, and you got conquering kingdoms and war and all of that. So there is a lot of war, but there is also a lot of plot, a lot of characters, which I absolutely loved. A lot of dark themes in this, so definitely for adults only, and I am on board with this. I would definitely recommend this. I really remember that I enjoyed the writing as well. It flew by despite being so big, which is always a plus. And there are so many to read from, so if you are eager to get in a series and just binge read them, or having to read a lot and just getting yourself really busy by reading an awesome series, I would say definitely give this a try. Erotic fantasy, so fantasy that's for adults only, and there are a lot of sexual content in it. Just I put it there because there is no other way to say that. But yes, I actually do have recommendations, although I don't read many, and the few I've read, the main focus is a lot of time on the plot. So just be aware of that. But I will mention two. One I don't have, but it's my favorites between the two, and then they got an honorable mention kind of. So we have Kushel's Dart. Kushel's Dart is part again of a long series with different trilogies in that. I have completed the first trilogy and read the first two books in the second trilogy, never finished because my books are in Italy, not for other reasons. I just need to pick them up. By the first series you follow Pedre. Pedre is born poor, and she is born with brown eyes and a red mark on one of her pupils, or both of her pupils, I think maybe both. And this basically marks her as someone who will be able to withstand a lot of pain, and she decides to use that, a lot of physical pain, and she actually becomes a concubine. And in this city, Teredange, I think it's called, becomes a concubine, and she is basically used for BDSM at the end of the day. But there is, yes, sexual content, but it's not by any means the main part of the story. It's not, oh yeah, this happened and then 100 pages of sex. No, I would say 5 pages of maybe sex scenes or like more smutty scenes, and then you got an awesome plot. It's really adventurous, full of things happening. It's one of my best ships ever. I loved everything about that book. That book, all the 3 books in the series were 5 stars, full of plot twists, complicated, intrigued, well-crafted story with some smut in it. And the honorable mention is the Black Dagger Brotherhood series. This could also be considered urban fantasy and vampire fantasy. You got a brotherhood of vampires who defends the world against these lessers, which are weird things, not humans, but things that actually feed on human and kill a lot of humans. So actually the vampire are the good guys, and they all find their mates, and you follow them. but I really like the writing, and I read them really seldomly lately. So I've not read one probably in 2 years, but at the beginning, the first ones in the series I really enjoyed. Back then I was more into romantic smutty books, and now not so much, but I will pick up still the books in the series, just not as fast as I used to. I would also say there is a plot in these, and I did enjoy it, but there is also, say that if, you know, the Kushel's Dart is 10% and then 90% plot, but the 10% is, but the plot is even better. This one is 50-50 probably. Some books 70 smutty and 30 just plot. And I do love all the characters, and the way she writes them, she is so good at making you care for these characters, and all of them are really distinct with their own personality and love stories, and I really enjoyed. And later in the series you've got LGBTQ characters, so you follow them as well, something really refreshing for the genre, especially when it comes down to vampires and urban fantasy smutty things. So I think if you're looking for something like that, this is a definitely a must read. Fable fantasy. So these are fantasy based on fables. Couldn't recommend anything apart from Fables by Bill Willingham. This is a comic series. So you've got all the fables we grew up with: Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Snow White, the Big Bad Wolf. They flee from their original world because they're being invaded by a bad guy, and they come and live in New York, and they live all in this neighborhood, and their story intertwined, people getting together, and it's actiony and it's really nice at the same time. And I love many of the characters. It's 15 volumes in the deluxe edition. It has come to a conclusion, and it's one of my favorite series when it comes down to comics. And there are also dark themes in it, and really bad guys, and a lot of plot twists and all of that. So also The Darkling, which is a self-published book that's been recommended from one of my viewers, and this is based on the Beauty and the Beast. However, I remember that I really enjoyed it. It was quick, and it takes side of the story of the Beauty and the Beast, and it does in really gloomy, dark, kind of creepy, and yet fascinating way. And I remember really enjoying it, and again, it's really quick read, and I think it deserved way more lot than it actually had. We have Gas Lamp Fantasy, which well, takes place in those time Victorian era. The Gardella series, which again, this can also be considered vampires fantasy, but these I've really enjoyed. It's just the right amount of love to hate, and awesome relationship with a lot of action vampires and a lot of Victorian era scenery. And we've got our main protagonist, she's a woman, and she becomes a vampire hunter, and it's really well done. Just 5 books, not too long. Grim dark fantasy. So in this, it's, yes, dark fantasy where you follow a questionable character, not necessarily the hero, and it also has a kind of special laddie, sassy writing style a lot of times. And I personally I'm looking for a really good recommendation of this because I love them. I know Joe Abercrombie and First Law. I've got the first book, I need to read that, but I've not read it yet. That's the only reasons probably it's not in here, just because it's on my shelves. I've not read it yet. But I personally would say The Poppy War. You have our main protagonist, Ronin. She is poor, and she does her best to get in a military school, which is usually just for the elite. And she gets in, and she has to learn the art of war. And it turns out that a war is actually coming. And it turns out that, yes, she is what the world need, but not necessarily what the world will admit they need, because she is ruthless. This is grim dark, and I loved it. This is based on the massacre of Nanking as well, which is really crude and horrible thing that happened in our history, and it is heartbreaking. It is adult only. It is really grim and dark. Loved it. It's one of the best fantasy. I think if it comes down to subgenres, high fantasy and grim dark fantasy is probably my favorite one. So with Poppy War holds a special place in my heart. I had to take this opportunity to recommend it. I've been filming for so long now. But yeah, gunpowder fantasy. A lot of time is military fantasy. There is a lot of firearms used basically, and again, I've not read many of those. The Powder Mage trilogy, really enjoyed the first book that I read so far. We'll continue the series. I think I cannot recommend another one because that's the only one I've read, but it was a good one. Not gonna go into the plot because I don't remember, it was really complicated, but military fantasy where you have actually gunpowder, and a lot of powers that people have are related to gunpowder. People even had powers related to that, and it was really a new take of military fantasy, which I really enjoyed. Writing, it was okay, not the best, but I think there's so much room for improvement that I will definitely follow the author and continue reading. Hero fantasy. You've got your hero, main hero, and he has, to defeat the bad guy. And I would definitely go with Harry Potter for this. Yes, can be considered also urban fantasy and many other, but I would say that I cannot think of a better example personally of fantasy where we have our main protagonist, we each is the hero, no doubt there, no gray areas. Harry Potter is the hero, and we got our bad guy who's only bad, and you got these two forces confronting each other. I cannot think of a better one. I can, but it will be in another recommendation than that one. So go with Harry Potter. Low fantasy, so fantasy that takes place in our world where the fantasy elements are not too prominent. And I think when I was researching this, a lot of people even put Mistborn in it. I know it might be because Mistborn, yes, it's a fantasy, but the magic is it's not too present. I mean, it's present, but the powers are not too strong, basically. But personally, I kind of consider these similar to urban fantasy, I'd say. So I would definitely suggest for younger reader Percy Jackson, and we know what it's about, and also Shadowhunters. I enjoyed Shadowhunters for what they were. Didn't pull my hair out, but I enjoyed them overall. I've read Lady Midnight, but not past that. I will. And this is a kind of a low fantasy that I will go with. Then we have got magic realism fantasy. Recently I've read The Wolf in the Whale by Jordana Maxbowski. This is definitely a magic realism where the magic is so hinted at, and it's so mystical, and just it's not the major part of the story, but at the same time it's subtly powerful, I would say. It's just, for example, some religions I would definitely categorize them the way they're described in books like magic realism, where they have an influence on the main story, but they're not prominent in any way, and it's not the main part of the plot. And this takes place in Alaska. It's really weird, this story, and it's really intense and hard to read, I'll be really honest. I found myself sometimes having to stop and say, this is heavy to read. I don't know why. I've read worse things of what happens to these characters, but this one felt so well written and so real that actually hit me in the chest a lot. And the magic realism comes from the fact that this story is about this boy who is born after his parents die, and this boy's got something weird about him, and he has to fight for his small clan in Alaska where they live, where they're being invaded, and he also has to figure out who they want him to be and who he really is. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. And it is intense, it's not for everybody, but I think it's a really powerful story that kind of stuck with me for a long time. I didn't give this more than 3.75 stars, I think, or 4 stars. It's not 5 stars, but it's one of those books that stood out to me in the genre. And definitely another one that I really enjoy is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Love this one. There's a TV show also, like that one, but the book I really enjoyed when I read that. Definitely magic realism, where you got, again, religion being more real than it is in real world. Medieval fantasy that takes place in medieval times, not I couldn't think of many for this, so I will just go with Stardust, another by Neil Gaiman. I am sure I've read many more, but there is actually another series that I'm going to mention later that I want to put in this category, but then I chose to put in the other category, so I haven't. But Stardust, cute tiny stories in those years, definitely, and it is a mainly love story, but it's in Neil Gaiman style, and if you read them in before, you know what I mean. If not, this is a really good starting point. I think this is the first novel by him that I read and really enjoyed. Military fantasy, so fantasy that are mainly based on military and strategies and all of that. The Stormlight Archives is a perfectly good example, but I'm not done with that. So I will go with The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu instead. I gave this probably 3.75 stars, but I believe this will get better the more we continue on, to be honest. And this is definitely military based. It's all about different kingdoms at war with each other. There are some plot twists. I think one of the critics said about this book is that because things keep happening and it's not really character driven apart from a couple of characters, then we don't really get attached to these characters before things happen. But what happens and the strategies and the military combat and all that aspect is really well done. This received a lot of praises and I will definitely continue on. I'm still glad I read it, but it's a chunk of a book and it was a bit slow in some parts. But if you like military fantasy, I would say that you cannot miss this out, to be honest. On that aspect, it was great. And I want to mention a series of books that are definitely also kind of military based and I really enjoyed. And I had the pleasure of actually getting this from the author himself, who is really amazing. And I will be probably talking about this book in another video in more details. Self-published, really well written. And this is Wildcat, the book one in the Caledon Saga by J.P. Harker. This video is not sponsored or anything of the sort. I'm just generally really enjoying it. And the first book is about Rhian Wyn. She is born in a tribe in what we call Wales. And she is basically ready to get married and the Romans come. And they are invading her land. So she has to actually go back to combat instead of just being a wife and a mother. And it is full of plot twists and some of them I hadn't seen coming, and it's honestly truly well written and I honestly really enjoyed it and I read it fairly quickly because it's a really chunk of a book. And then we got this one and then we have companions book in the series. So far I got Leaping Wolf and then I got the third book, which is The Lion Cub, and I still have to read those other two because this year my TBR list has gone out of the window because I'm moving and work and so on. But we'll definitely continue on, and it's really another military based. There's a lot of details regarding military and regarding the Roman Empire and how they used to combat. It is not all based on history. There are a lot of elements that the author came up with, but it's loosely based on when the Romans came to England and invaded. And it's a lot of combat scenes and really descriptive. Then I've got paranormal fantasy, so a fantasy that's paranormal also. With these, I couldn't think of a better option than The Diviners by Libba Bray. Really enjoyed this. You follow a bunch of characters in New York in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken, and they all have some kind of paranormal power. For example, Evie, our main protagonist, one of the main protagonists, she can read objects. So she touches an object and she sees the history of the object. And they all come together in a way or the other, and they have to defeat really powerful, angry, scary as fuck ghosts. And I love them. They're full of amazing characters. All the characters I love to pieces and full of plot twists, and they are dark. These ghosts they fight are scary. Awesome writing. They are big, but they are so worthy. Audiobooks are awesome as well. Also, the Australian paperbacks are just slowly but surely destroying my bookshelves behind me, but this was gonna happen anyway, so just don't be upset if they're gonna become a mess by the end of this video. We have horror fantasy with horror elements in it, and honorable mention definitely Stephen King, the Dark Tower series, with the Italian one, sorry, but I've read the first one. I want to continue on definitely, but I read other Stephen Kings in the meantime, and also I'm reading the comics of The Stand really enjoying those, which can be definitely considered horror. Speaking of comics, horror comics more on the light horror side, meaning that they are horror-ish but not necessarily too scary, although love the plot of these. They are so cleverly plotted. These books are Lock and Key. Not many volumes of these are just free. I love the art of these as well. I mean, these books, these comics, whether you want to call them, they are stunning. I enjoyed also the TV show, although toward the end takes a different twist, which I understand because of the TV show format, they have to change things. Love these. And if you instead want to really do something quickly horror-ish but really soft horror, Through the Woods, one of my best graphic novels ever. She is one of my favorite ones when it comes down to comic styles. Emily Carroll, I love her so much. And this is just a short stories, horror-ish story. Definitely, even for teenagers, these are definitely fine. But I love this one so much. I have to talk about this, even if briefly. And I will also say that by Anne Rice, there is The Witches of Mayfair. She is really famous to write things and books about vampires, which I enjoyed and read, and I would definitely say there is an horror element in there. But the most scary ones I've read by her is the Witch trilogy. This really graphic, this horror, it is a bit scary, it is very unsettling, and there is a lot of sex scenes, some of them disturbing. But the plot and these books, I remember that I read one after the other, I was really intrigued. She's got a unique style, Anne Rice, and if you have not tried her yet and you don't want maybe to commit to a whole series regarding the vampires, which is really super long and dull and a bit dragging, although I appreciate it, so I will read all of it, I would say this is just a trilogy. Yes, chunk of a books, but weird as fuck, horror, intense, disturbing. Definitely one of the most disturbing fantasy I could think of. Quest fantasy. You've got our bunch of characters going on a quest with a specific objective. Lord of the Rings, it's literally nothing better I can come up with. Portal fantasy is a fantasy where our characters, the protagonists we follow, they travel to another world or dimension by a portal. And yes, for example, Narnia, again, it's one of those. But I would go with, first of all, the Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is the Italian cover. Pretty awful, I'm sorry. But yeah, there is definitely portal magic in this, lyrical, well written for young adults, so you read it really quickly. I think I gave it 4 stars. It's not a 5 stars for me, but it's definitely one with portals that I appreciated, especially because of the writing and the peculiarity. And we got a kind of demon and an angel, I'll say just that. And also Outlander. I know this is very controversial. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. I enjoy a lot of the TV show. I'm not gonna go into the controversy. It's a book. I enjoyed it. I've stopped now reading the books, so we'll just continue with the TV shows. But she's got such a lovely writing, and as an idea, it was brilliant. You might not like the execution, whatever. I love the idea. I love the first books. Jamie is in my heart. We got post-World War II Claire. She goes to Scotland with her husband, who's doing some research, travels in the woods. She comes across these huge stones. She touches the stones and she's transported back in Scotland centuries and centuries before. And she meets an Highlander called Jamie Fraser. And if only was that easy to just find your own gorgeous Outlander, unfortunately it's not. So moving on. Romance fantasy with a lot of romance in it. I could just come up with many of the books I've just mentioned, many that you've heard me telling you so far that got some romance in it. But definitely a trilogy that I really enjoy. Again, controversial whether I enjoyed this one. Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. YA kind of series. You got our protagonist, she roams in the land of the fays by mistake hunting for her hungry family, and she comes across with Fae, gorgeous man, who tells her, you know, you have now to stay and you cannot go back. And so yeah, it's smutty, it's awesome. I really enjoyed this one. I couldn't put these books down. I think Sarah J Maas writes really, it just captures your attention in wholesale. And then, you know, despite you might not loving the books at the end, which the majority of them I absolutely loved, you have to keep reading. Personally, that's it. I definitely recommend this. It is entertaining, it is full of romance, and just fit perfect. Science fantasy. With this, I think when I saw Daniel's video, it was not necessarily just sci-fi. It was like fantasy with a lot of science elements. He mentioned Dune, which I've not read, but for the sake of this video and because there is no sci-fi category, I will interpret this as sci-fi. We will go with two, which is really beloved graphic novels of mine. I love this one so much. I love the art, and this is about Tony Chu. Tony Chu is a cyberpath, meaning that when he tastes something, he can see where that thing is coming from, all the life of that thing and he's tasting. And he is hired by the police, and guess what he has to taste? Guess where he is useful. So yes, this is weird. It is sci-fi. It becomes more sci-fi toward the ends, but it's in this world where chicken is also outlawed, so people cannot eat chicken. And there are a lot of powers related to food. It's a unique concept with awesome art. This is a series that you don't want to miss out. Even if you don't like comics, this is one of the weirdest and yet cleverest and funniest thing you'll ever read. Trust me on that. Chew, you won't regret Chew, no matter what. Chew you cannot regret. I've never met anybody who hated Chew. Literally nobody. Series fantasy. Series of books that are fantasies, and with this basically the majority of the ones I've just mentioned could go in there, but I will go with the Demon Saga by R.A. Salvatore again. I really enjoyed this when I read it. I didn't start chronologically, that was my fault. I read it back in the day in Italy when I was not so skilled in looking up books and I was not so familiar on all the world of books and, you know, going chronological and all of that. But this trilogy I really enjoyed, and it's just a high fantasy with a really intense, it does get the idea of like old fantasy and really intricate with characters that have good versus evil and all that good stuff we all love. And it's not one that I hear mentioning often, and I really remember enjoying it. There is an element of religion in that, but I don't know why. I overall really enjoyed this. It didn't bother me too much in that sense. So yeah, that's my recommendation for these, which could be any of the other recommendations that I just gave to you. Steampunk fantasy. Fantasy that's based on steampunk elements. And with this, I cannot go with anything apart from Lady Mechanica comic. Can we? Lady Mechanica, something happens to this lady, she wakes up half machine, and she has to catch the bad guys in the Victoria steampunk era. And then we got Monstrous, another comic. I have read a really few steampunk books, and none so far just stood out to me as these two graphic novels. Full of Micah, half wolf, and also her mother has some weird powers, and she has to find her mother who disappeared, and she doesn't know what happened to her, and there are weird monsters in here. And Micah, she is savage, and I love her, and there are powers and steampunk elements. It's just awesome. It really stood out to me both because of the art style and the plot. I think plot wise I prefer tiny bit this one, just because this one is more complicated, so I need to binge read them once they're all out so I can not forget things and really enjoy the plot as well. But I do enjoy it. It's just that plot wise probably this is the strongest so far because it's also the simplest, and absolutely love it. It's more intrigued, more complicated, more layered if you want. Two series that I absolutely follow, and I'm really glad I found out about them in a book that is steampunk and I really enjoyed. This is the second one, but is Ascending by Josiah Bancroft. And the premise of this is our main protagonist just marries, he was a teacher, and they travel to the Tower of Babylon, which is this really weird tower where each floor is got basically his own system, environment and government. So they travel there with the intention of doing their honeymoon together and travel through some of the levels of the tower. And he loses his bride in the market outside, so he needs to venture inside the tower to find his wife, and he's awesome. It's really new idea, compelling, lot of plot twists. We've got nice characters. It's just the plot is so clever and so new, so fresh taking. And this idea of this tower where each level is a brand new world, some cruel, some weird as fuck, some nice, kind of. It's just awesome that each level you've got a new brand world that the author is going to describe. Awesome. It's the only one I can think of, and I really enjoyed this. Superhero fantasy with superheroes in it. I've not read many. I'm not a huge fan of books with superheroes in it, so just disclaimer, I might not read many, to be honest. I just do not care that much, but enjoyed this one. Still Heart by Brandon Sanderson, full of plot twists. Didn't see many of those coming. Really enjoyed this one, and it's like a shorter one to be his. This is on the shorter side. We'll continue with the series and also The Boys, the comic, but the TV show on Amazon is 100%, is 50 times better. It's one of the best TV shows I've seen this year, 2020, when I'm filming this. It is everything. Swashbuckling, I think that's how you pronounce it, fantasy with out of mayhem in there. It does remind me of two pirates, and you know, The Lies of Locke Lamora are one example of this, although again it can be in other categories as well. And I like that one, but I didn't love it. So personally, my recommendation would be Minty Diaz's Storm Sister, The Sinking World. We got a bunch of female pirates going and doing mayhem. I absolutely love them. I love the friendship between these characters. It's not a well-known book at all, so I thought this deserved a shout out. I won this through a giveaway on Goodreads back 3 years ago, and I loved it so much. And you got female pirates with awesome friendship in it, and you know, just really swashbuckling goodness. Just really, trust me. Also, The Lies of Locke Lamora, it's really famous. There is a reason for that. Urban fantasy. Premise, I've not read the new Sarah J Maas book, so I've not read yet. I've got it, so that's why probably it's not in here as well. Don't know if I will love it or not. Urban fantasy, I've read so many, and it was really difficult to choose one. I would just mention a few. The Demon Road by Derek Landy, YA. If you're a fan of Supernatural, the TV show, this is for you. Ember, she goes home one day and her parents try to kill her, and she has to flee, and she finds this man with a really weird, mean car, but also awesome car, and she goes on an adventure, and this is sick, especially the first one. It's a trilogy, short series, all good, but the first one is the best, 5 stars. Magic Bites, really enjoyed that one. They kind of same plot, a little bit the same premise, but then, you know, with urban fantasy you can do so much. That these are the series that for me personally I enjoy the way they were written, and I found them a bit more refreshing. Dead Witch Walking, all this series, really good one. This one by Simon R. Green. This is the 4th one, and I've read the first one, and it's Nightshade series. I don't know, I put here the covers, but this series, this was my Dresden Files basically. Will make my way through the Dresden Files. I've just read one so far, but I absolutely loved this series. And if you have not tried, and if you love the Dresden Files, as of now, I've read 1 Dresden Files and 3 of these of his, and I love them 100% more. I might change my mind. I will continue both series and then judge, but I absolutely found them so bloody entertaining, and just the best. And also Anita Blake. These can go into vampire, can go into the erotica genre. I would say the first 10 books in the series are the strongest. Then we go down a really wrong path, and I hated the last few books in the series. But to these days, the first 9, 8 specific, and then 10, I'll say, books are freaking awesome. If you love urban fantasy, Kika's main protagonist, she is a necromancer, and she's also someone who hunts vampire for the law. So vampires are accepted in the world, but if they don't respect the rule, Anita is sent by the government to execute them. Awesome one until the 10th one, and then just let it go. Just trust me, it's not worth it. We are almost there. Vampire fantasy with vampires in it. Dracula, my best classic so far. Dracula. There is a reason why. Dracula is the father of vampires. It's just, yes, it can be a bit dragging, but I loved every piece of it. You have to see this. If you love vampire fantasy, this is where all began. You cannot miss Dracula. Also, if you're really into vampire fantasy, I think you have to educate yourself on the classics, which part of those are the series by Anne Rice. This is just the graphic novels of a side story of Claudia. So it's, I'm going to show you the art, but I haven't read this yet, to be honest. But I've read probably around 8 of the main series. The first one is Interview with the Vampire. They are long, dragging, this kind of vibe of Renaissance, and really they're standard vampires with all the characteristics of vampires as Dracula might have. They're not glowing vampires, they're really ancient vampire. I would definitely call Anne Rice vampires the classic vampires. It's like the next step in the classics regarding vampire fantasy after Bram Stoker and Nosferatu and all the kind of vampires. They are the modern fantasy of vampires, and if you really enjoy those vampire stories and you really want to see like more intense, it's really heavy and yes, a bit slow, but also unique. It is unique. The books by Anne Rice are unique. Just keep that in mind, and I will continue and finish the series because I think they got something, and because I love the genre so much, I kind of feel the need of educating myself on, the classics regarding vampires. And Anne Rice series is definitely one of them. And finally, we have got YA fantasy target for YA audience. Many that I've already mentioned, but I cannot think about another one that, popular one that I really enjoyed at the end of the day. Throne of Glass series, I enjoyed it overall. The last one was not the strongest, the end, not all 5 stars at all, but overall, when I think about YA fantasy, recently at least, I think about that, and all the other books in the YA genre that I've already mentioned, I absolutely loved as well, so they all could fit in this category as well. But I just need to pick up one, and I haven't mentioned that yet. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and these are just the books I loved, but again, I'm always open to new recommendation and read and broaden my horizons of all these kind of subgenre of the fantasy genre that I absolutely love and cherish. Have a good night, day, depending on where you are, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!